Chapter 5. He reached over and picked up the small, smoothly cast lightning bolt, staring at it for a moment, then looked at her. "I followed a hunch," she said. "Checked your hiking boots." "That was more than a hunch." Callie shrugged. The nagging question finally came within his grasp. "You know about Haven. You knew about Jacoby not because of any news reports, but because you were expecting him to be here. You're here because of him. You're FBI, aren't you? More than that, you're SCU." Callie replied readily, "I am, and yes, that's why I'm here, because of Jacoby." Evenly, he said, "I asked you before, how long have you been a telepath?" Matter-of-factly, she said, "Born one. As soon as I could talk, I was freaking my parents out, telling them what they were thinking." A fleeting smile crossed her face, and learning a lot more about all kinds of things kids aren't supposed to know. "How soon do they have you in therapy?" This time the smile lingered, a bit wry. "I was lucky. Psychic abilities run in the family, reportedly going back generations. Between my grandmother's sight and my aunt's ability to talk to the dead, telepathy wasn't such a big deal. Once everybody got used to it, and once they taught me to begin building my shield and to keep it to myself whenever the odd thought from someone else slipped through, especially if they weren't family." "Which you did. Keep it to yourself, I mean." "Sure. Even kids know that to be different is to attract the wrong kind of attention, especially kids. Didn't want to be considered a freak. Besides, it gave me even more motivation to build strong shields so I could shut out the mental chatter all around me at will. I've had a lifetime to make those shields very, very strong." "So what? You dropped them with me?" "I was curious. You send and receive. Not so common." He debated with himself for a silent moment, then said, "Far as I know, I've never sent or received with anyone else, and I've been tested like we all are." Callie didn't seem disturbed. "Must be right on my frequency then. Bishop and Miranda are too." Like all Haven operatives, Luther knew who they were talking about, even though he had not met either of the FBI agents. But they're both telepaths and strong ones. I'm not." "News for you. You're a telepath now. I'm guessing you got a little bit too close to the energy around Cole Jacoby. It's powerful stuff. Powerful enough to trigger a latent ability, maybe even create one." Luther also knew what all operatives and agents knew, that external energy from various sources could affect, even change a psychic's abilities, sometimes drastically, such as activating what had been a completely unknown latent ability, like flipping a switch, but creating one? "There's energy around him?" "Definitely. I didn't feel anything when I was there." "Didn't you?" Her gaze was steady. Luther thought back, then sighed. "I don't know. Maybe I did. It's hard to say, because that sort of thing isn't normal for me. I tend not to pick up energy of any kind unless I'm touching something and concentrating. The only thing I touched near Jacoby were a few trees." He glanced down at his leg, "and a bullet." "Which he touched when he loaded his gun." Callie shook her head slightly. "I didn't feel anything unusual when I dug it out of you, but we both know any energy it might have held could have been discharged earlier." "Into me?" "Suppose it's possible, but I'm no expert when it comes to the transference of energy. Not really my job to figure out the why of all this. From what I'm told, the SCU and Haven operatives are adding a hell of a lot of empirical data to scientific understanding of just how energy works. Still a lot more questions than answers, though." Luther frowned, considered a few unsettling possible consequences to himself, then dismissed it as something to deal with later, if and when he had to. "This energy, you say, is around Jacoby. Is it created by him?" "Not sure yet whether he's the source. I didn't get the chance to explore the area around that cabin before he got here, and so far I haven't caught him venturing very far away." "So it could be coming from the area rather than from him." Luther was very carefully not thinking about any change in his own abilities. Not yet. He suspected his mind wasn't quite ready to deal with that just yet. "Some places store energy," Callie agreed. "Some are even sources of energy. We figured out that much. energy the earth itself generates and the topography of a place holds on to. And these are old mountains with a lot of violent history soaked into the very ground and held there in some places. Maybe the area around Jacoby's cabin is one of those places. Maybe choosing that particular cabin was no accident or coincidence. Maybe he knew what was there. Or maybe it's just him. Somewhat belatedly, Luther said, "I'm surprised Maggie didn't tell me there was an SCU agent here. Or didn't she know?" I have no idea whether she knew. All I know is that I'm here because Bishop had a hunch. And before you jump on that one, I'm guessing we both know his hunches are never just that. Whatever he believes is going to happen, he didn't share with me. You're here alone? Except for Caesar. I thought Bishop always sent his people out in teams. Almost always. There are some teams with multiple agents. A few agents work solo more often than not, and a few work only with a single partner. As far as I know, I'm the only one on the team with a canine partner. She nodded toward the watchful Rottweiler. He's your partner? Yep, trained and certified as a law enforcement dog. I raised and trained him, going through several different programs in which we both received specialized training. And then I got him Bishop approved. Luther was surprised, but when he considered it did seem quite reasonable for Bishop to accept a trained dog to aid one of his agents. From what little was really known outside the SCU of the unit chief, he was all about giving his people whatever tools they could use to investigate crimes. And the FBI certainly employed canine units for a variety of purposes. You might have told me some of this sooner. Her eyebrows lifted in faint surprise. I was trained by Bishop. Never volunteer information unless and until you have no other choice or else deem it necessary. Until you asked, I really didn't see any reason to explain why I was here. How long have you been here? Luther asked, deciding not to waste a glare. Couple weeks, like I said. Luther swore under his breath. Then what the hell am I doing here? I gather the FBI agent in the nearest field office requested help from Haven in locating his fugitive. Since the fugitive escaped from FBI agents while in their custody, this is one of those cases where it's the FBI rather than the U.S. Marshals Service who's responsible for tracking and recapturing this guy. And the FBI field agent doesn't know you're here? No, and my cover is solid. Anybody checking the records would find that this land and cabin belong to the Davis family, this branch of which I'm connected to through a couple of marriages and a few cousins. For real? On paper. The current owner of this place doesn't usually come up here this time of year and was happy instead to take a nice vacation out to Vegas, cash bonus in hand. He was also happy to mention his trip and my occupancy here before he left to a few friends down in town. Devil's Gap? When she nodded, he said, almost as an aside, I wonder whose bright idea that name was. Maybe a translation of an old Native American name? There are a lot of them in these mountains, especially in areas like this with a lot more wilderness and civilization. She paused, then added wryly, anyway, it's the sort of town where everybody pretty much knows everybody else's business, even if they keep it among the natives. So my bona fides are established. Cole wasn't entirely sure he was awake. He was walking through the forest, dawn still a distant coming, and he was looking for something, but he wasn't sure what he was looking for. There were no voices in his head, and that was good. That was so good he practically sat down and cried with relief. But instead he kept walking, looking around as best he could in the moonlight. When he thought about it, he realized that he wasn't even sure where he was. He didn't feel lost, only displaced and driven to find whatever it was he needed to find. There was a little ravine, he thought, and a tree on its banks with roots exposed from many spring rains. That was where she was. She? A niggling unease stirred in his mind, but it was pushed down relentlessly. This time not by voices, but by something else inside him he was briefly aware was darker and more powerful, and needful. After that he stopped worrying about it and just kept walking, briskly, climbing up to where he'd hidden her safely away. Because it was time. Bishop is thorough, I'll give him that much, and probably easier to be prepared for things when you see some of them coming. Luther shook his head but added, "We both know what my orders were. What about yours? I gather capture the fugitive isn't necessarily Bishop's primary goal?" It wasn't a question. Callie smiled wryly. "My assignment is to try to figure out how Jacoby managed to escape 2 experienced federal agents without any apparent outside help, without being armed, and leaving them with no memory of what happened." "Figure out psychically, I gather?" "Yeah. One of my things is picking up on and sometimes being able to interpret negative energy." "That's what Bishop figured Jacoby used?" "As it was explained to me, it would take negative energy to steal time from someone. By definition, taking away is a negative action. The agents lost time, or the memories of time, whichever it was. They haven't gotten it back yet. Not such a good sign, that." The realization that his own newly created abilities as a telepath, assuming Callie was right about that, might have come from negative energy made Luther's skin crawl more than a bit. "Right now you're a neutral telepath," Callie said calmly. "I'm not picking up on anything, either positive or negative, coming from you. Not so unusual with abilities that go active suddenly or unexpectedly. They tend to just sort of sit there for a bit, letting us adjust, usually. The thing is, you need to keep your distance from any kind of negative energy, at least until you've learned to shield this new ability." "I have a shield," he said slowly. "Usually, it's how I blend in when I'm tracking someone, how I'm not seen. That's my thing." "I know, but that shield..." For the first time, she seemed to be struggling to convey something, but whether it was because she didn't have the knowledge or lacked the ability to express it was something Luther couldn't begin to guess. "What about it?" She was frowning. "It's cracked, for want of a better word. I wasn't around you before you came here, but I can't believe that what I sense is normal for you. Not if it's always hidden you the way you describe, the way I was told your abilities work, so something must have happened. To you, to it. And I doubt it was being shot." "I've been shot before," he said. "Nothing changed that time, not psychically." "Okay. Then we should probably assume the damage to your shield has something to do with the energy around Jacoby's place, which makes it especially vital that you keep your distance now. Aside from the cracked shield, new abilities tend to be affected by external energy a lot faster and more drastically than established ones." "Affected how?" "You probably know as much as I do." "I sort of doubt it." "Affected how?" She studied him for a moment, then gave a faint shrug. "Thing is, I can't tell for certain how strong a telepath you are. My abilities don't work that way. I know you can send and receive apparently complete thoughts, sentences, and I know that's unusual. It speaks to the strength of your abilities, especially since telepathy is a new one, but still doesn't tell me just how powerful you are. And that's important because the more powerful you are, the more at risk you are right now, as a new psychic, of being affected by external energy sources, especially with that cracked shield." Luther stared at her for a long moment, then repeated steadily, "Affected how?" "That depends on the energy, how strong it is, what the source is, what's generating the energy and why. Whether that cracked shield offers you enough protection or even any at all. If you can't protect yourself at all, well, energy can do all kinds of things. Psychic energy, we both know, can do amazing things, positive as well as negative. Since this is negative energy, it could have a negative effect on you, physically, psychically, even emotionally. At best, it could attack you in a sense, be a drain on your own energy. And at worst, I don't know the worst. To my knowledge, this particular situation has never happened to an SCU agent or Haven operative." I don't much like the sound of that, he said slowly. No, I imagine not. In fact, I imagine it wouldn't be a good thing for any of us, especially not here and now. Whatever Jacoby can or can't do, the energy all around him is dark. And though I haven't gotten close enough to be sure, I have a strong hunch it's controlling him rather than the other way around. Energy can do that? It was something he'd never heard of. It can if he can't protect himself or deliberately open himself to it. If it's coming from a powerful source with an agenda, so to speak. A disembodied spirit who doesn't like being disembodied, or is just plain angry or evil, for instance. An energy that wants, needs, control. An energy that wants to escape whatever's been holding it, containing it here. Wants, needs, that implies a consciousness. In fact, it damn well demands one. I'd agree with that. How can energy have a consciousness? Like I said, it could be coming from a disembodied spirit or spirits. Jacoby himself could be a psychic whose abilities became active due to some event we have no way of knowing, or due to the sudden onset of mental illness of one kind or another. Psychiatric patients are usually at the mercy of their illnesses, and that is one of the psychic triggers we've recently identified. One of the scarier ones, Luther noted dryly. Yeah, most of us feel a little too out of control, a little too often as it is. The threat of maybe going crazy isn't exactly reassuring. One reason I'm glad I was born with my abilities and have never had a new one triggered. Luther was wishing he could say the same on both counts. Anyway, the dark energy could come from Jacoby for whatever reason, or it could be the place, the area around that cabin, or the cabin itself that somehow soaked up the negative energy of something horrific. A battle, maybe a murder or murders. Energy that's been trapped there a long time, growing darker and darker because it's trapped there. Energy that is, in a sense, holding him hostage. Possible. Possible he's trying to deal with something he's never before had to deal with, maybe gaining control, or not. As I said, I know he hasn't strayed very far from the place since he got here. Not far at all, in fact. She frowned. I don't know how he was able to escape the agents, but all through that part of the story, his actions were careful, methodical, planned, precise, organized, and unhurried. He didn't try to run right away. He took the time and the risk of staying in the same area long enough to get his dogs. Maybe long enough for something else we haven't yet discovered. He had the cabin rented and waiting, probably the Jeep hidden somewhere waiting for him. Maybe the other vehicles as well, and all of them turned out to be untraceable. He had supplies stashed or got them somewhere along the way where no one recognized him and no security camera we know of recorded it. And I guess both likely and unlikely stores were checked. By some very good technical analysts, yes. Between traffic cams and cameras at ATMs and security cams, had a lot of businesses, and especially given the relatively small area, there was a good chance of catching him on security footage somewhere. At least that was a logical thought, but he wasn't spotted anywhere on camera. No sign of him shopping, or getting gas for that matter. No recordings of him at all. Just a witness here or there who'd never have noticed him except that his picture was all over TV and the internet. She smiled faintly. Never mind the bolo. Today it's TV and the internet that brings more witnesses forward. And he hasn't shown up on any cell phone captured videos on YouTube yet. We have people monitoring that too. She drew a breath and let it out slowly, thoughtful. He was headed this way all along, and both before and during the trip was sharp enough and careful enough to lay false trails miles away from his destination. He had a plan for his escape, and it was a good one. He picked a place to hide, and it was a good one, at least on paper. It really wasn't until he got up here that his behavior became very obviously erratic. Which makes it at least possible he wasn't nearly so dangerous until he arrived here and became affected by something in the area. something in that cabin or in the area around it. Luther thought about it. But you said taking away the memories of those agents was a negative thing? Something he did before he got here? The first step he took in escaping? The first step that we know of. Cole Jacoby was in a very dark place. He felt an enormous pressure as if something with incredible strength and will had backed him into a corner, or put him inside a box, or wrapped him tightly in something and was holding him still. He couldn't see, couldn't move, couldn't hear even his own breathing, or feel his heart beating, or sense anything in the darkness except the impenetrable blackness of nothing. Was he dead? No, because he could smell something rusty, something metallic, something very, very old that made him afraid in a way that he could never remember being afraid. And something that smelled a lot like, well, it had to be sulfur, had to be. Even rotten eggs didn't have the bite, the sharp, eye-watering sting of true sulfur. There was nothing else like that, except maybe brimstone. Even as that realization surfaced, he decided to ignore it. He was just sleeping, that was all. Caught in some kind of weird nightmare. That had to be it, because it couldn't be real, could it? No, a nightmare. It explained why he couldn't move, why he couldn't see or speak, or feel anything except blackness and terror. And nightmares were unpredictable, he knew that. It explained why he could smell when he couldn't use any other sense. And then it explained why he could suddenly hear with a painful clarity. It just didn't explain what he heard. It didn't explain the screaming. Luther nodded. True, attempting to control the guards may just have been the next step for him. Maybe because he'd already tried whatever his psychic senses, and realized he could only influence one or two minds at most, or couldn't control them long enough for his purposes. So he had to figure out a way to get out of prison, even temporarily. His actual first step may have been to offer the feds just enough information, or the promise of it, to persuade them to transfer him. He either took the chance or was reasonably sure he could exercise some kind of control over the two agents. Maybe they were all he could handle. Makes sense, Callie agreed. He had to have practiced in prison. We may know little about psychic mind control, but common sense says nobody learns how to successfully control the minds of two other people the first time they try. And he was in there for weeks, waiting for his trial, and months after his conviction. He must have taken every chance to practice when he was relatively alone with someone else. His cellmate, maybe a guard or two, even his legal counsel. Especially his legal counsel. Privileged communication, and so not monitored even within a highly monitored prison, she agreed. That would have been a good chance, except that he had no visits from his attorney. None at all? No. A couple of phone calls, but there wasn't much chance of an appeal. The prosecution had him cold. They got him with about $100,000 on him, all of it from the robbery. Security footage from the bank when it was actually robbed wasn't much use because of a glitch, but they had footage of him pretty obviously casing the place the day before. They had his fingerprints, even his DNA. Should I ask how they had that at the scene of a bank robbery? Luther asked warily. Callie smiled. The place was busy when he got there, and he killed a little time while he was covertly studying the layout, pretending to fill out a deposit envelope, which he licked. Not very bright. Well, in fairness to him, the camera footage showed him shoving it into a pocket. His bad luck that it fell out before he left was missed by the cleaning crew that evening. Fingerprints on the envelope matched those later discovered in the vault. He didn't wear gloves. Latex ones, one of which he left behind in the vault. The text got his prints from the inside of the glove. Luther shook his head and frowned as he thought. So he's caught, tried, convicted, sent to prison. Talks to his legal counsel only over the phone. What about visitors? No visitors. What, none at all? Nope, Callie was certain, or mail, and no internet connection at all. In fact, no computer access. Prisoners only get that after proven good behavior. Once he was inside, and except for a couple of brief calls from his attorney, he only had contact with the people inside. No family? A half-sister, considerably older. Not so much estranged as complete strangers. Her mother got total custody after a young, brief marriage, and Jacoby's father apparently never saw her again. He remarried, then started a second family when his son was born. As far as we were able to determine, Cole Jacoby never met his half-sister and likely doesn't know she even exists. Luther frowned. Okay, so no visitors. Maybe makes it even more likely that Jacoby had to spend a lot of time practicing, figuring out what he could do, and maybe easier on strangers. He still could have been trying to control other minds a long time before he escaped. Trying, yeah, but even being semi-alone with his cellmate or a guard or two now and then, it wouldn't have been easy for an experienced psychic to control any abilities, especially such a specific ability, with so many violent minds all around, so much negative energy. Prison bars can hold prisoners, but their violent energy permeates the place. It soaks into the walls and floors. The older the prison, especially a high-security prison, the more negative the energy. Where they kept Jacoby, the energy was very dark and very bleak. After studying her for a moment, Luther said, "You appear to speak from experience." She nodded. Prisons were one of the places I visited when we were trying to analyze my abilities. Square foot by square foot, they're the most negative places I've ever visited, and that includes psychiatric hospitals and trauma units. Even the federal country club type prisons where white-collar criminals are kept read as pretty damn negative, at least to somebody like me. And the most positive place you've read? So far it was a monastery in Asia. He blinked, thought about asking her, and then decided that was an undoubtedly interesting story for later. Callie didn't seem to notice. So if Jacoby was able to open any kind of psychic door to his own mind in that prison, it's dollars to donuts, he let something in, and that was more than likely to be negative energy. Let something in before he was able to escape the prison. If he was practicing, especially something new to him, that's a virtual certainty. We all tend to leave ourselves vulnerable when we use our abilities. We're somewhat protected when we use them in a positive way. His way wasn't positive. And whatever he let in, he wouldn't be able to control. I wouldn't think so, not then. And I still think the more minds around him, the less likely he was and is to control a specific mind with any kind of accuracy. Luther frowned. Negative energy. If he started trying to control other minds there in prison and didn't really know what he was doing because the abilities were new or he'd never tried to use them before, then wouldn't he have been affected then? I mean, wouldn't he have shown signs of erratic behavior during and right after his escape? Callie considered, then nodded slowly. You'd think there would have been some sign, but I don't know. If it was recent enough, he might have been able to hide what was happening to him, especially if he was focused on escaping. If prison is where he first tried to control other minds, he likely would have failed, except maybe in some really small way. Maybe in just trying and trying there, unable to protect himself, even if he realized he should, he still could have fed off negative energy, even then, unconsciously, which could have given him more power, including the power to open a door in his own mind, and let in something darker than he expected. Maybe he started shaping his mind, his abilities, and because he was in a negative place, that was the only energy he could use. He probably couldn't tell the difference. Strong energy is strong energy. It takes experience to tell one from the other, usually. And, Luther said, however he experimented, whatever the results, there was enough to convince him he could control other minds if the conditions were right. They had a shot at using whatever it is to escape federal custody. Maybe he had a successful experiment or two, and the authorities just never noticed. Possible, even likely. The paranormal tends to be the last possibility most people consider. Way easier to believe a sleeping guard just nodded off than that he was put to sleep by a psychic. Let's assume Luther said that he practiced, that there was success, but maybe he realized there were too many people around, too many minds to control. He had to figure out a way to get himself alone with just one or two. He'd been inside before. He knew about prison transfers, about deals made. Also knew what bait was most likely to get him out of there. The money. No one knew where he'd hidden the rest of it. No evidence at all, and no sign of a partner. So just him. And feds eager to question him, maybe make a deal. They make deals with serial killers. Jacoby wasn't dangerous, never had been, and they didn't see him as a threat. Especially, Callier agreed, a psychic threat. Bishop was already suspicious, though I don't think even he had any idea Jacoby was capable of escaping custody. Or he would have sent SCU agents. That, or made sure Jacoby was knocked out for the trip. And when Luther lifted his brows, she added, best not to take any chances would have been his reasoning. Well, events proved that probably would have been wise, Luther said dryly. Yeah, Callie brooded for a moment, but what's here now, in Jacoby or around that cabin, I've never sensed anything that dark, even in a prison, and most certainly not at a distance. If Jacoby came up here with the door open to darkness, with a latent ability suddenly gone active, or an old ability he was still learning how to control, if he didn't know how to protect himself from a darkness that powerful, or even stupidly welcomed it because he thought it meant more power for him, trouble, I'll say. We haven't found any psychic capable of the sort of mind control Jacoby must have used. That would take a lot of power. Probably a lot more than Jacoby ever had a hope of mastering, whether he realized it or not. That kind of power would have had no trouble getting inside him, and it's more than likely taken hold of him by now. You're saying in hardly more than 2 weeks he could have gone from controlling, rather benignly, the minds of 2 agents to being possessed by some negative energy powerful enough to control him? It's possible, maybe even likely. His behavior up here is clear evidence something unusual is going on with him. Whether it was here or he brought it with him and it broke out once he got here, that darkness is nothing but negative, maybe even evil. Curiously, Luther said, you believe in evil as an actual physical force? Oh, yeah. Her voice remained calm, her eyes serene. And the thing is, we have more to worry about than what it's doing to Jacoby. There's also you. You have that cracked shield. You're vulnerable because you have a new ability not under your control at all. You have an open door. The darkness, the evil up there could be very bad for you. Chapter 6. What are you doing here? Hollis repeated, her voice a little louder but still low. You're one of Diana's spirit guides, not mine, she frowned. I don't even have guides. The spirit who in life had been a young girl called Brooke shook her head. Diana has lots of spirit guides. She needed them to get through what she had to in her life. But I was there last time because of the situation, not because of her. Your team was still fighting Samuel and you needed my help. Sure that wasn't a little bit of vengeance on your part? I mean, he was directly responsible for your death. Brooke's young face appeared thoughtful. You know, there really isn't much of a need for revenge or even justice once you get here. Here? Brooke smiled. Hollis didn't waste breath for a curse. And now? You wanted to learn how to handle being a medium. I'm going to help you do that, at least for a while. Why? Hollis asked, never accused of being indirect. Brooke seemed to hesitate, then said, Bishop and Miranda aren't wrong to be concerned about you. Hollis hugged her upraised legs a little tighter. Too much going on inside my brain, huh? Let's just say the energy is becoming palpable. Meaning, Brooke said slowly, the only time you unconsciously used a conduit was when you helped Diana. Reese was there, touching you, and because you were so tired, and the need was so great, you drew on his strength without being consciously aware of it. Hollis moved uneasily. I wish you hadn't told me that. You already knew. Okay, maybe, but not for sure, and I don't like it. Bad enough I've needed him as an anchor to escape Diana's gray time. I don't want to be something that feeds off others. You can't look at it that way. Oh, can't I? No. All his life, Reese has had extra energy. At times, almost too much to contain. You've noticed it yourself, that tension you've sensed in him, the hair-trigger alertness. He worked hard to contain it. It's why he has that unique double shield of his, and why the surface of him almost always seems so calm. It's also one reason he joined the military, to have a strict focus, a rigid routine, and a high degree of physical activity to help burn off excess energy. Hollis felt almost as if she were eavesdropping, learning things about him Reese wasn't the one telling her. But somehow she couldn't ask the spirit to stop. Something inside her told her that she needed to hear this now, and that Reese would be slow to tell her, if he told her at all. Bishop saw that excess energy and Reese's ways of dealing with it. Because of the experiences of other agents, he thought there was probably a better way, better for Reese. And better for me? But if he has too much energy, and I have too much energy, then, well, bang, too much energy collides and both of us stroke out, or worse. If the two of you are just trying to combine energies, especially without a powerful emotional connection, that's probably what would happen. Hollis narrowed her eyes and stared at Brooke, but the spirit remained serene. But Bishop believes that instead of merely combining your energies, both of you can act as conduits, channeling energy safely away from yourselves at need. You did it helping Diana by channeling not only your energy, but some of Reese's as well. You said it yourself, that was a one-time thing, pure instinct driven by need. But successful. Hollis thought about it for a minute. You didn't just casually drop in that little item about a powerful emotional connection, did you? Brooke smiled. Look, whatever he said during a difficult and exhausting point in an investigation, the truth is that we're partners, and that's all. There isn't an emotional connection. In just about 5 minutes, Brooke said Reese is going to walk through that door. Not because he heard you talking, but because he feels that you're awake and upset. That is an emotional connection. Like it or not, the beginnings of something potentially much more powerful already exist between the two of you. Hollis glanced toward the connecting door, then unconsciously lowered her voice even more. He's a natural caretaker, that's all. Actually, he isn't. Brooke looked thoughtful. Probably as a consequence of struggling all his life to contain all that energy, even his emotions turned inward. Oh, he's an honorable man and a responsible man, which made him an excellent officer in the military, and makes him excel at undercover work, but he could probably count on one hand the people he's truly cared for in his life, and most of those would be recent ads. Look, I don't know what it is you expect me to do. Hollis didn't even like having this knowledge. It made her uncomfortable, assuming any of it was even real. Just keep an open mind. Hollis stared at her. I'm a medium talking to the spirit of a girl who was murdered by an insane preacher bent on ruling the world after he destroyed it with his very scary and evil psychic abilities. I see auras. I can bring myself pretty much back from the dead and heal others, at least to a degree. My friends are telepaths and seers and other mediums, and I know about and can visit, sometimes against my will, a gray place that's probably limbo or purgatory, but definitely an elsewhere, and is really, really cold and creepy. All of that can be defined as beyond normal, and I believe in it all. I've experienced it all. If I were any more open-minded, my brains would fall out. When Cole fought his way back to consciousness, it was to hear a low, rumbling sound that was at once strange and familiar, and to smell something equally both strange and familiar. He managed to sit up, to swing his legs off the cot, He lifted his hands to rub his eyes, but stopped short of touching himself because the smell was overpowering. He blinked and tried to focus on the very dim light of dawn coming through the cabin's windows and the even fainter reddish gleam of embers in the fireplace. That was why his hands looked red, wasn't it? He fumbled for the kerosene lamp on the rustic coffee table and fumbled even more to get a match from the box beside it and light the lamp. The low rumbling sound, what was it? It made the hairs on the back of his neck stand out, and the smell made his stomach churn. He was finally able to light the lamp and adjust the flame until its yellowish light brightened the room, managing not to actually look at his hands until it was done. Then, a wordless dread inside him. He looked. It hadn't been the fireplace light that had made his hands look red. They were stained red, his hands, wrists, halfway up his forearms, stained red and stinking of something metallic that was familiar in an odd way, and explained why his stomach churned. Flashes of memories mixed with the primal instinct, blood. His hands were covered with dried blood. Baffled, fearful, he stared at them for a long moment until the low rumbling sound again drew his attention. He looked up around the room. Their eyes weren't red anymore, but his dogs were all tensely awake, staring at him and growling. Brooke was smiling faintly. Okay, just so you don't lose sight of that, expecting the unexpected should probably be your mantra. I thought that some things just have to happen the way they happen. The SCU mantra, and Haven's really. I guess being ready for the unexpected should be your personal mantra. Gosh knows it fits, shaking her head, Hollis said. Well, everything else aside, I don't know what it is you expect to happen here. Anna wants to communicate with her dead husband. Maybe I can help bring that about, or maybe I can't. Wouldn't want to tell me which it is, would you? That would be against the rules, yeah. Thought that would be her answer. Well, then, what about the bright light? Can you tell me? Brooke was shaking her head. All I can tell you about that is some people see it when they cross over and some people don't. Why? I don't know. I suppose because every experience is unique. Did you see it? No, Brooke replied readily. But I haven't really crossed over yet. Things to do first, mediums to help. Hollis sighed her disappointment but wasn't surprised. The universe they had discovered seldom made things easy for them, which rather begged the question, why help me? She demanded. If I'm one of the things you need to do before you can move on, there must be a reason. Her tone innocent, Brooke said, I'm just following orders. From? Brooke smiled again. With another sigh, Hollis said, not going to be too helpful, huh? Then she frowned. Okay, if you don't tell me why, then tell me why now. We aren't on a case. Like I said, I'm just trying to reach some poor woman's husband so she knows he still exists in some kind of life after this one. You really believe that's the only reason you're here? Isn't it? Remember the mantra, the SCU and Haven one. That bit about being taught that some things have to happen just the way they happen? Well, yeah, but for the first time, Hollis realized that the SCU mantra might encompass more than just investigations. Hollis stared at Brooke for a long moment. Diana warned me about spirit guides, how cryptic you guys can be, usually are, and how remarkably unhelpful for, guides. You might want to look up that word, or tell your boss to. She reflected, then added, well, ask, not tell. Brooke's smile faded. I will tell you that there's more in this house than you came here expecting, a lot more. You need to be careful, very, very careful. Don't open the wrong door or hold any of them open for too long. You won't like what might come through. I'll be around, Hollis. Wait, what? Brooke vanished, and in almost the same moment, Reese appeared in the doorway, wearing a robe and seemingly wide awake. It occurred to Hollis that she'd only ever seen him in two states, wide awake or dead asleep. He probably didn't even have an in-between. Hollis, you okay? Just tell me I wasn't broadcasting my dreams. As far as I know, you weren't. I didn't pick up anything last night once you went out like a light after your shower. And nothing now except a general unease. She stared at him, wondering if he remembered her sleepy invitation to join her, wondering if that had been only her imagination. Surely it was that. Surely. Then, why are you awake? She asked finally. I usually awake about this time in the morning. Before dawn? Old habits. Military habits, she thought, but all she said was, well, I don't think I'm up for the day. I think I'll go back to sleep until a decent hour. If she could do that after Brooke's very unsettling warning. Reese didn't seem surprised or disturbed. Sounds like a good plan. I'll shower and shave, maybe do a little exploring. She started to warn him about all the spirits, then remembered he wouldn't be troubled by them. Okay, if I'm still asleep, when they usually serve breakfast around here, wake me up, will you? No problem. I'll see you later. He turned and retreated back into their shared sitting room, and from there, presumably, to his own bedroom and his shower. Hollis stared after him for a long time, trying not to think because she didn't want to broadcast. It was hard, though, not thinking, when there was so much on her mind, so many questions and worries. She had known for a while that Bishop and Miranda were concerned about her, about the way she kept acquiring quote-unquote fun new toys of the psychic variety seemingly with every case. And when those two worried, well, they didn't worry over trifles. Nobody had to tell Hollis that the human brain was both exceptionally powerful and conversely fragile. Like every other organ in the human body, it had its limits. Unfortunately, nobody really knew what those were. Yeah. But everybody who counted was pretty damn sure that Hollis was pushing limits way, way too often. Would she be pushing yet another limit if she and Reese found a way to channel excess energy, or would that help somehow? No way of knowing without trying, which seemed to be very much the norm in Hollis's life. And now, here was Brooke warning her to be careful, telling her without saying very much at all that there was reason to be wary in this house, wary in doing this relatively simple exercise and being a medium that was not supposed to be dangerous. Hollis lay back on the bed and pulled the covers up around her. She felt cold and uneasy and just a little bit scared. Just a little bit. Luther said, "We all struggle with our abilities. We live with the potential dangers of using them. It's just possibilities we accept, and I came here to do a job." You've done that. Found Jacoby, yeah, but there's more to it. Is there? You wouldn't be here otherwise. Well, my assignment is a bit different. I need to understand just what kind of psychic he is, assuming that's how he escaped. And I have to try to get a handle on that energy all around him. You know it's there. You know it's negative. What else do you need to know? Everything else we've been talking about, how strong it is, whether it's coming from him or something else, whether he's in control or it is, if the source in the area somehow, if the source is the area somehow, then there's at least an even chance that its effects on Jacoby would lessen or even disappear if we could get him away from here. A chance, not a certainty. No. Depending on whether he was a latent or just unusually vulnerable to the effects of energy, whether he's using it or it's using him, he may have changed permanently. I'm sure you know as well as I do that psychics rarely lose abilities or the strength of abilities once they have them, though some kind of trauma has been known to affect, even destroy abilities. But we really don't have much data on what might happen if a psychic's abilities were created or at least strengthened by an external source, especially an ability apparently triggered or created by negative energy. Like my telepathy, like your telepathy, and possibly Jacoby's abilities, whatever those really are. Callie rose and took both their coffee cups to be refilled. Luther only half watched her. trying to think the situation through. From a standpoint of tactics and resources. He accepted the coffee from her and took a swallow, grateful for the warmth, even if it did little to help the cold unease inside him. No matter which way he looked at it, which way he considered, the situation up here seemed like a bad one to him. He looked at her as she sat across from him, knowing better than to underestimate any of Bishop's people, but way too conscious of himself likely being more of a burden than a help. Every instinct tells me that could be bad a lot easier than it could be good for both of us. Given that it's negative energy, you're probably right. I should leave. He took another swallow of his coffee, frowning. We should both leave, or get down to town and call for backup. Possibilities, she allowed, but so far the bad is distant enough not to worry me. This being a safe spot, I'm inclined to stay, at least for the time being, and you need time to heal. I can't be much help while I'm healing. Oh, there isn't all that much to be done, she reminded him. Yeah, right. You trying to gather information about Jacoby and his bad energy alone also sounds like a bad idea. He held up his free hand when she would have spoken. Granted, I don't know the strength of your abilities, but the point is the going anywhere near him alone part. With all due respect to Caesar, if Jacoby is stronger than you believe, or darker, more negative, neither your abilities nor your dog might be able to protect you. What then? She returned his gaze steadily for a moment, sipping her coffee, then said, Well, I'm a great one for not crossing bridges until I come to them. Right now, there's no urgent reason why I need to get close to Jacoby. Time enough. In a few days, I'm thinking. Give him a chance to settle down after the encounter with you. Give him time to drop his guard. If it's up, you'll likely be on your feet by then. He uttered a short laugh. Yeah, but there's also the thing about me becoming an active telepath with a cracked shield, and being affected by that negative energy even more than I possibly already have been. If you're right about that, I could well be more of a hindrance than a help. Maybe. Or maybe we'll just have to keep you near, but at a safe distance from that cabin. And if it's Jacoby generating that negative energy, or he's able to carry it with him, Luther was having a bit of trouble concentrating, and he frowned when her grave face seemed to blur a bit. He took a drink of his strong coffee, hoping it would help. It didn't. It's something I, have to find out about him, along with other questions to be answered. Whether it's growing or getting darker, just how far you can go in using it, if he has any control at all. So you have to get closer to him. Eventually, no real hurry. He's shooting at people, Callie. Those hunters weren't threatening him, and I didn't threaten him, but he shot at all of us. He rubbed his face with one hand, wondering if maybe a hot shower would clear his head somewhat. Except he didn't want to use up her propane. When the time comes, I'll be careful, she said. Still, Bishop should have sent somebody else with you. Or we should call for backup. He was vaguely aware that Callie had gotten up silently and come over to take his coffee cup away from him. Why don't you rest a bit, she suggested. Your leg needs time to heal, and nothing much is likely to happen in the next few hours. Sleep. He didn't want to. In fact, he fought against it, trying mightily to keep his eyes open. But he lost the fight, and it wasn't until he was almost out that he suddenly wondered, would I do that? She murmured, apparently understanding. Luther thought she would. He also thought he didn't care much and slipped into a peaceful darkness. Callie carried the bowls and cups to the sink. Caesar uttered a curiously human sigh when she passed him, and she laughed under her breath. Well, he obviously wasn't going to rest any other way. His mind was going a mile a minute. Just a little sedation, that's all. He'll sleep a few hours and be the better for it. Won't like you. He won't be happy, but I doubt he'll be angry. Tricked him. The easy telepathic link she had with Caesar, existing since the first time she picked up the wiggling black and tan puppy, had become an important part of Callie's life and an integral part of the professional partnership. Also, the major reason Bishop had not only okayed the partnership, but had asked that she provide rather extensive reports of her communications with her dog, as well as other animals she was able to connect to. There had been a few of those along the way, but communication with animals other than Caesar tended to be brief and not nearly so human. Whether Caesar had developed better language skills over the years, or they had simply become more familiar with each other through almost constant contact, their silent communications were sometimes very like human discussions, like now. I know I tricked him, but he'll forgive me. Sometimes people have to be persuaded to do what's best. Don't worry about it. Stubborn man. Yes, he is. Stubborn Callie. She chuckled, true enough, and since he's weakened by loss of blood, my stubborn beats his. With another sigh, Caesar rose from the rug and glanced at the door, then back at her. Callie nodded slowly. Guess we should, and now before it gets too late. She retrieved her weapon from a drawer of a small table near the door and clipped it to her belt, then took her quilted hooded jacket from the hook also near the door and put it on. She automatically checked to make sure her flashlight was in her pocket, took a last look at her guest to make sure he was resting comfortably, then said to Caesar, "Remind me to give him that penicillin shot when we get back. Probably best if I do that before he wakes up." Probably. Shots hurt. Caesar's tail not docked, as was the case with many Rottweilers, waved once, and then he followed her from the cabin. Callie didn't use her flashlight. She stood there on the wide porch of the cabin for a couple of minutes to allow her eyes to adjust, then moved out. It was dawn, but not by any stretch of the imagination bright. The mountain slope that hosted both her cabin and Jacoby's faced east, but with another mountain between them and the rising sun, every new day took its time arriving. The air was cold and clear, only the wisp of wood smoke from her fireplace hinting of anything not of nature's doing. Callie automatically chose a path slightly different from the one she had used the last time she had gone out to check on Jacoby. Every time she varied her way, if only by a few yards, because she was naturally cautious and because she didn't want to wear an actual path through the woods between his cabin and hers. Despite the blanket of fallen leaves beneath her boots, it had been a wet autumn, so she didn't have to worry about making noise as she walked. Not that she generally made any noise unless she wanted to. She was in no particular hurry, walking slowly but allowing her gaze to scan the way ahead, looking and listening for anything out of place. About 50 yards from her cabin, she stopped and quietly released Caesar from his automatic heel position so he could do his own kind of scanning. He moved out willingly, nose to the ground, and moving silently, pausing here and there to mark his territory, but keeping within her sight and at the center of a wide circle. Clearly, since he had no comment and showed no other signs, he sensed nothing to disturb him, and after a few minutes, Callie continued on. Depending on the path she took, it was nearly a mile between her cabin and Jacoby's, and she had covered around half that distance when she stopped, suddenly, frowning. Nothing looked out of place, nothing sounded out of place, and yet she felt an odd pressure, a reluctance to take another step forward. Still, she had to try. Stop. She turned her head to see that Caesar had also come to a halt, even with her but higher up the slope. He didn't make a sound but dipped his nose toward the ground, then lifted his head and looked at her. Trouble? She communicated silently because she wasn't sure what it was Caesar was bothered by. Not good. Come see. Callie was wary, but not overly concerned. If there had been danger about, Caesar's behavior, as well as the warning, would have been quite different. Still, as she crossed the space to join her dog, she slid her hand inside her jacket and rested it on the handle of her gun, thumb ready to unsnap the holster. When she reached Caesar, she looked at the ground just in front of him, and even in the faint dawn light, she could see a wetness that was not last week's rain or last night's dew. She took her hand off the weapon and drew out her flashlight instead as she went down on one knee. She didn't turn the light on immediately, but instead reached down and touched 2 fingers to the wetness. In the faint light, her fingertips looked stained. A quick check with her flashlight confirmed what she already knew. Blood. But whose? She murmured. It wasn't Luther's, because he hadn't gotten this far, and because the path she had used to bring him to her cabin was a good 50 yards farther down slope, where a narrow but relatively flat ridge had made it easier for Caesar to pull the litter. An animal wounded by some hunter, or the attack of another animal deeper in the forest? An injured hunter? Not animal. Human. Caesar was both too sensitive and too well trained to be wrong about that sort of thing. Okay, but without something to compare it to, that's all you can really tell me, right? Yes, for sure, human, but what? I think, girl, afraid. It didn't surprise Callie that Caesar could determine the gender of a victim from blood. His senses were extraordinary. Even after years, she was still marveling at them. She turned the flashlight back on and carefully examined the ground all around them. Nothing. No tracks, no paw prints or hoof prints or footprints visible anywhere, except the faint marks left by her and her dog. Of course, the blanket of leaves was thick, so there would likely be clear marks only if sharp hooves had dug into the ground here, or something heavy had fallen, or there had been a struggle of some kind. No sign of anything like that. A girl who had been afraid, perhaps forced or carried against her will. There could have been no other physical signs of that here, at least none that would be visible without a forensic examination. The blood was fresh. Callie was no forensics expert, but she knew enough to be reasonably sure this blood was only a few hours old, if that. Yet she and Caesar had walked past this spot no more than 20 yards down the slope when they had come out to check on Jacoby earlier. Callie was certain Caesar would have scented the blood even at that distance had it been here. Yes, would have. Wasn't here then. Do you know who she is? Not familiar scent, but fear, much fear. Was she running? No, carried. By Jacoby? Not sure. Strange scent. Strange like what? Caesar looked at her, and for a moment Callie was certain she could discern bafflement in his calm eyes. Strange, old, dark, black, evil. It surprised Callie more than a little that Caesar gave her that answer. Even with all their investigations over years, he had never used the word evil, and she would have said it was a concept he didn't understand. Clearly, she would have been wrong. Bad, very bad, hungry bad, needing bad. Needing what? Needing power, needing energy. Why? To escape and what? Fight. Fight what? Fight who? Not sure. Fight, escape, dig. Callie could feel the strain as her dog tried to sort through impressions and concepts that were familiar to his canine mind, and others that were clearly difficult for him to understand. It's okay, she murmured aloud, resting her free hand briefly on his head. This is my job too. And that job had just become a lot more complicated. There was darkness and evil, she felt that herself, but there was also blood and fear and a girl. So who had passed this way in the last couple of hours in darkness and in silence and bleeding? Was there another danger on this mountain, or had Cole Jacoby become much, much worse than a bank robber? Can we help the girl? Callie had to ask. No. Caesar's response was instant. She's already dead? Dead. Gone. Worse. Callie was almost afraid to ask, but steeled herself and did. Worse than dead? Pain. So much pain. It needed energy. It made her afraid. Jacoby? The evil inside. Becoming what? more evil.